Welcome back. We are live for another episode of Growing with My Fellow Growers. This is your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. I'm going to throw it first off to Spartan Grown. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jack. What's up, everybody? I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram at Spartan Grown, all one word, or you can shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com. If you have questions, I do both organic and synthetic growing, so hopefully I could help you or point you in the right direction if you have a question.
Always happy to have you. And next up, we've got Dr. MJ.
Hey everyone, I am Dr. MJ Coco from cocoforcannabis.com. I am excited to be back on the show. I'll be able to stick around and look forward to another fun panel with everybody. And thanks to the chat for showing up.
Glad to have you back. Next up, Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, it's Matthew Gates, and I'm an IPM specialist. And if you want to find my content about pest management practices, you can find it on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol, and you can find it on my Instagram at SyncAngel and on my Twitter at SyncAngel. And I have a video coming up pretty soon about how aphids feed and how they detect, locate, and recognize suitable host plants. And we'll be going over some of the interesting conversations about brix for those who are curious.
I look forward to that, and just want to welcome everybody and remind them to switch on over to the live chat so we can see all the messages. And I'll throw out my email, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com, for anybody who doesn't do the social media thing. And next up, I want to pass it over to Aaron the Grower.
What's up, Jack? Panel. Good to see everybody this week. I am Aaron the Grower, atgacres.com, ATG Acres on Instagram, and ATG Acres on YouTube. Good to be back. I'm trimming up on some Baja Blast, some just really incredible weed that I don't know if anybody's ever seen. So check out my Instagram if you get a chance, and you'll get to see that.
It sounds delicious. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that as we get into the show, but I'm going to pass it next to a man who's now going by a new title, Pure Breeding. Welcome back, Kyle Breeder.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so if anybody that doesn't know, via some posts I've done, I changed my name for business purposes. It's a little more simplistic, more direct. I love it personally. It's a lot easier just to relay information and other scenarios. But yeah, if anybody's looking for any feminized seeds, that's what I specialize in. I have a website that's the letter P followed by breeding.com. And I am looking into obtaining another website, but they'll all link to one place. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, predicative breed. I'm sorry. Wow. See, I'm still into it. Pure Breeding. You can find me there, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
We'll all be messing it up for a while. So I think it still might say predicative breeding on like one of the things on your Instagram, but it'll all get updated soon. And pbreeding.com is always good for both. So pbreeding is a good one for you, and I'm happy to have you back. Next up, we've got Brandon Rust.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brandon Rust here. Always good to be on the panel along with all the rest of the panelists. You can find me on Instagram at rust.brandon. You can also find a link to my company, Bukashi Earthworks, and my farm that I co-own with my partners, Black Label Organics.
Glad to have you back. And last but certainly not least, especially this week, because we've got a little surprise announcement, the American one. He's finding his mute button, but it's building the suspense.
Yeah, man, my mute button's getting stuck. Sorry about the delay. Jack, everyone on the panel, good to be here. I'm glad to see everybody here. We have a full panel. Everyone in chat, I'm glad to see you showing up. And yeah, we'll get right to it. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you back. And I just wanted to maybe throw it off first with something that Dr. MJ might like to talk about. I don't know if anybody else has some topics in mind, and I'm making sure that we don't have anybody else trying to join us this week. But I just was reminded myself to use my phone as a PPFD meter the other day, because I was like, you know what, my plants are starting to foxtail a little bit. I think my light might be a little bit too close to the plants, starting to notice some foxtailing. So I break out my phone. I use the Doggo app's light meter for Android, and MyGrow has done a video on it. and shown side by side his testing with like $500 meter and shown that it's fairly comparable, at least for a home grower's perspective. And there's also another one for the iPhone.
Does that work on Android now? Because before it didn't, and even Migros said it wasn't as shaky.
Well, the one I think a lot of people looked over, I'm going to share a screen. There's 2 videos. He has one that's for iPhone. I think that works better for iPhone, but I think you have to put a piece of paper over the sensor. And then the Android one is, it works just fine without any modification.
With no paper at all?
No paper.
Okay, I didn't know that.
You don't have to put a diffuser?
I've got it downloaded on my phone. I just haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, I mean, my comment about that is I've had less success using the phone meter apps than Migros seems to have had. I have not tested that one. I was testing the Corona app. And even sort of with all the different settings, I couldn't get reliable results across different fixtures. One of the issues is they're all measuring brightness. They're not actually measuring photons. They're not counting photons. They're measuring lux and then converting that into PPFD. And in order to successfully convert that, you need to know the color temperature of the spectrum. And there's just a lot of room for errors. So I think you can get pretty close. I think in certain situations that would be helpful. You know, measuring LED light is sort of notoriously difficult in a grow space to begin with. So my argument about a lot of these things has been for a while, it's better to test lights in a controlled situation, know what you're dealing with, and then base it off of those metrics. For example, the reflective walls make a huge difference to the amount of light that reaches the canopy. And if you're standing there with one of the walls open, taking a measurement, it's not going to be accurate. So you have to at least like close things up and recreate the exact setting. But I don't know. I haven't come across a phone app that I felt comfortable sort of telling people this would be reliable regardless of the lights that you're testing or sort of the position that they're in, because it also makes a big difference whether the sensor is getting, it depends on how it's measuring. And for the lux sensors, it really doesn't. For the lux sensors, they're measuring brightness and converting it. And as long as you're doing a conversion, meaning you know your color temperature, and
it's still got to be better than guessing.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Here's 3,500K. Which
maybe not. Maybe it's the same as guessing.
It's, in my opinion, it's
I mean, it's tough, man. I was getting really unreliable measurements with the Corona app. And if I didn't have a PPFD meter alongside of it, I wouldn't have known necessarily sort of how far off the various measurements were. And eventually, after tweaking some things and setting some things, I was able to get it to match up close enough. And then I put it under a different light and it was totally different again. So like if you have a PPFD meter and you can calibrate it, but otherwise it really felt like, wow, if people are going to actually go on this, I'm not entirely sure it's going to be accurate enough. Now you could get, they should be getting better with this. And if you know data about your light, the specific color temperature of your light, it can be a lot easier to do the conversion.
Yeah, so in my case, I'm using a 3500K as my base. And when he did the conversion, it's lux, which you are correct. And he gives the mathematical equation. It's like divided by 10 or 100. I can't remember. You just take off a few zeros and you could tell once you do it a few times, like what the range that you're looking for is. Like 2000 is going to be like 200,000 or 20,000, something like that. And when you hover the phone in certain areas across the canopy, like in the case that I'm growing right now, Amy Aces, it just kind of, I maybe vegged it a little bit too long. And one of the very top cola got a little bit too close to the light. I couldn't move it up any higher. I was super cropping it. And I did actually, because I took the reading after I noticed there was some foxtailing on that one and some of the buds, have the ability to pull it down a little bit and bring it from what was getting 2000 ppfd to 1100 ppfd. Just by a small adjustment without having to move the light at all. And in my opinion, I think that the plant's doing a lot better now because I had that. Not many home growers are going to invest 500 into the light meters that he's using.
No, that's not my point. I don't really use my sensor in my own grow. I set my light and my grow based on the test data for the fixture that I'm using.
And I do that ideally too, but I think there's also like LEDs over time, they do burn out. So like maybe you can run it a little bit closer after 2 years of running the light. I think there's some variables, but like in this case, it was not a planned event. So ideally,
That's an interesting
X amount
comment.
of inches away.
You're right. They're going to reduce the light a little bit through time, right? The LEDs become, I mean, they don't really burn out, but yeah, essentially burned out. They become less efficient. But if you then take that as an opportunity to lower your light to maintain the same maximum PPFD, and this is the thing that I keep coming back to when I keep testing lights, is that the efficient hanging height is somewhat higher than the minimal hanging height for almost every light. And certainly for lights that are a little bit underpowered, that's even more true, because those edge values get really low if you hang the light too close. So the overall usable PPF, like the amount of light that reaches the canopy, doesn't really change that much based on how high the light is above the canopy. What changes is the distribution, and you can get a lot more light in the sort of in the hot spot, but it's almost always at the expense of the light around the periphery. So if I was in like a 3x3 tent with a 3x3 light, and that light started to degrade through time, I don't think that it's the right call is to set it closer and closer and closer to the canopy. I would keep it at the same height, because you still want the distribution, even though the usable PPF is like dropping off through time, unless you're going to add light to that space.
That's a good point. I just wanted to mention something that I was showing kind of in the background, just for the people that are listening to the podcast, that it also showed 4,000 Kelvin conversions and also showed HPS conversions for the Doggo app. And this was the other video that I found from Migro. And I think this might be the Corona app that you were mentioning. But he measured it again against a $500 sensor. But he's also just recently measured it against a $250 sensor. And he's also measured it against like $30 sensors on Amazon. So I think like whatever people's level of comfort, this is the Cheap Home Bro. I just like to give people the options. Most people already have a cell phone. So like Spartan said, it's just, in my opinion, it's better than guessing. If you get at least the proper app and you know how to make the adjustments for it, as he describes properly in these two videos. I just wanted to show these off because so many times in DMs, I've actually recommended this to people and had it diagnosed that they were giving either way too much or way too little light. And it at least is able to get them in the ballpark, in my opinion. And I've seen it have a lot of success at helping not only their grows bounce back, but my own. One of my testers for the Velvet Punch, I was like, what was your PPFD roughly, if you could guess? And they were also using cob LEDs, running a little bit, probably too much PPFD. And it made me go check my own grow, because I was like, hey, I haven't checked in a little while, might as well figure it out. And it was just a good insight for me. And I thought it was a nice little way to start off the show, to give some people at least a free option. And there's also, like I said, he gives my grow on his channel. I don't have these pulled up right now for reference, but he gives a few other options, like the I think they're also lux meters with conversions, but I think they're like $30 options or something like that. So
I would say that it's better to go with if you're going to get a cheaper meter, it's better to go with a lux meter and run a conversion than it is to get a cheap PPFD meter. Simply because the cheap PPFD meters, they're not going to be as accurate because they're not going to measure the low angle light. They're only going to measure the light that's coming straight at the sensor. They're basically designed, they work well in the sun when the sun's like a million miles away and it's like a single point in the sky and all the light's coming at it from that angle. But in our grow tents, there's a lot of low angle light that's coming reflected off the walls. And those cheaper PPFD sensors are not designed to accurately measure those low angle photons. And so it's really the lux meters still do receive the light from those photons. And so you still will sort of factor that in. It's also less, and that's one of the issues that makes all of these conversions a little bit lower when you're dealing with a reflective space. And that's the cosine correction of low angle light. Those low angle photons affect photosynthesis, assuming they hit chloroplasts, they affect photosynthesis just as much as a photon that's coming straight down. But unless the sensor is adjusting for them, it feels to the sensor like a much lower hit. So it's not lighting up the lux as much. It's not getting measured as hard of a hit for the PPFD sensor. So they undercount those low angle photons relative to what your plant is going to experience. These are sort of always issues. I'm always torn. I totally agree that I don't think most growers need to invest in really expensive sensors. Like I said, I have a really expensive sensor and I very rarely use it in my own grow to sort of set or adjust my lights. I think one of the issues is a lot of growers are under the impression that they should try to get their lights sort of as close as they possibly can to maximize performance. And generally that's probably not the case. I think we're probably pushing them too much. You should certainly get lights that are appropriately sized for the grow space that you have. And, there's lots of sources for that, but I try to be one of them in terms of like how much space will a particular fixture light up and how high should you generally run it. But at that point, if you're in a tent with a single light, you're not talking about adding or subtracting light, or you're not like your light isn't overpowered. One case where people really benefit from PPFD meters potentially is if they have too much light for their space and they're forced to dim it. But if you have the right light for the right space, I really don't see much need to invest in the PPFD meter. You just need good knowledge about how to run your light.
Or even if, like, for example, I know a lot of people run a lot of the lights that you've reviewed, so they can go and watch your video and know roughly exactly how much it is. And like what you and Migro have pointed out with the apogee meters is kind of like the top of my microphone. The light can hit it from multiple angles, which for a grow space is relative, it makes sense to have that ability. It actually gives it a better performance than like a flat cell phone would be, just taking in light from basically one point. I can notice when I like move the phone from this angle to that angle, it can go from like a 300 ppfd change just from that small adjustment.
Well, that's what the diffusers do. So there's two different ways to build a diffuser onto your cell phone camera. You just put a piece of paper down. That's the cheap way. That just distributes the light that's hitting the lens. The better way to build a diffuser, and they sell these because there's another cell phone app that sells you a diffuser to go along with it. That's like a little dome that sits over the top of the camera. And that little dome is more like the top of the microphone, right? Where it's catching more of those low angle photons. And they're gonna light up the dome just as much as the photons from the top. So that is certainly one way to improve the efficiency of the lux meter that you'd be sort of building with your camera.
Very good point. And I think we've definitely drilled some 20 minutes, I think, so far on the light topic and intros, but Matthew in the chat mentioned that he has another topic that we could get to. And unless anybody else has more thoughts on the lighting, I would like to pass it over to Matthew.
I had a mechanical engineering question about LED lights that could be really quick potentially.
Throw it out there.
Because you had mentioned like this, just the fact that like, entropy, the lights as you use them over time, they wear and they wear. And I just wanted to get just sort of a hot take. What would you say would be I know it's context based, but what would you say would be like a good longevity for a light, for an LED light?
Well, the rate of degradation is going to depend on how much power is being driven through the diodes. So if you have a light with a lot of top-rated diodes run at a fairly low current, then they're not going to degrade very quickly at all. If you have a cheaper light that has cheaper and fewer diodes that are essentially being overpowered, then they're going to degrade more quickly. So it really does depend. That's one of the advantages actually of getting a larger fixture and running it dim, is that it will degrade slower because driving the diodes at a lower wattage.
I think there's
That makes
one more
perfect
thing.
sense to me.
There's one more factor that you have to figure, especially business minded wise, and that is as quickly as the LED lighting seems to be advancing, I would say anything past 5 years, you're going to be replacing those fucking lights anyway. So who cares past 5 years? And we're already there.
That's certainly been true over the last 5 years. If you bought LEDs as a commercial grower 5 years ago, you need to probably upgrade them at this point because of the efficiency gains.
But going
say
That's
this,
a
forward,
great point to make economically.
Go ahead,
oh
pal.
yeah, efficiency is what you were going to say, because I was going to say, if you're already saying the plants can get too much light, why would you need better LEDs? But you get better efficiency. And the one thing I would say about the lux meter thingy, if you have multiple areas with different kind of lighting, like in veg, it might be useful for, because at one point when I switched my bulbs from those fluorescents to LEDs, I burnt my clones up pretty quickly, and I didn't quickly realize that was why. But yeah, so that's just, I'll add that in there.
Yeah, whenever you
Okay,
change
so
lights,
I
it's always
could-
good to measure. Sorry,
I
go
could
ahead.
go to my topic now for.
I have one more thing before we go on. I'm sorry to
Oh,
drag it
please
on.
do. Please do.
So I found a video that I wanted to reference because it was actually more degradation to LEDs than I thought. But I'll say this as a preface: we're comparing it to HIDs, and HID bulbs you could really replace every 6 months, definitely every year need to be replaced. LEDs don't need to be replaced at 1 year. They definitely run 2 very well, maybe 3, up to 5 for sure. Like Spartan's got some that have been running for 5 and they're still growing plants perfectly.
Yeah.
So
I would even say longer than that. I mean, in terms of just the degradation rate, it depends on what you're starting with. It depends on what your goals are. Like several things, but the only data that we really have on this is a test that Shane did for Micro. And every single manufacturer that I've talked to about it contests those results. And they say that it can't possibly be the degradation rate that he tested. And that they feel that they have their own data that demonstrates that. So they definitely degrade. I think that we really kind of need better data in order to understand more about sort of the rate and how different diodes driven at different power in different kind of settings. Doesn't matter if they're being run just 12 hours a day or for longer, things like that. We don't really know.
I think that might be one of the factors that maybe messed up his results, because I think he was running them 24 hours a day for 6,000 hours straight. And when you do that, it's different than running 12 on, 12 off, 12 on, 12 off. So I think his results may be skewed on the
they
more
certainly
aggressive
are going to run
degradation side.
hotter after a while, right? And they're going to hit that. They're going to be running for a longer time at that peak temperature without cooling down. So yeah,
Well, and
that's going to have an effect.
Let's follow the money, I guess. He is a salesman. He needs to sell lights. So he'd be more to find the data that says lights are going to be burning out quicker. So even if he's saying, oh, my lights will burn out quick, that means you have to buy a new one every so often. So he'd be more inclined to want you to buy them more quickly. It's like nutrient companies, giving you a dose that's higher than you actually need, even though it's counterintuitive because it's not going to help your grow. It helps them sell more nutrients.
I understand that thought process, but on the other end of it, you would think people wouldn't want to buy him if he's going to come out and say that they're not going to last long at the same time. So I think it's a wash, really.
He was careful, right, not to just say it about his own lights, but he did include his own lights in that.
I guess.
But yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to start trying to crawl inside people's heads and motivations.
Yeah.
And it goes from good to still pretty good. 208 to 199, 201 to 191, 193 to 178. These are all still better than HPS, even a Mars.
Yeah, and that's really not the degradation that we'd want to know what happened to the usable PPF. He's talking about the usable photon efficiency there, which is related to the usable PPF, but it doesn't really tell you how many photons are lost and what that does to the average PPFD in the grow space, and whether that means that there's now the corners are really falling below the threshold that you wanted to keep them at or not. Those are the questions we need to know.
That's interesting as I think about that. Do you think it would be possible spectrum changes then?
Yeah.
As they degrade?
Minor, though. I mean, I don't think you're going to be dealing with major spectrum changes, but to the extent that you have different diodes in a spectrum mix, yeah, the spectrum will shift slightly as different diodes sort of lose their performance at different rates.
That's interesting.
That's a good point. I think if they're all uniform, though, if you have a 3500K, it'd be more like a dimming effect. And if you dim a 3500K, it's still 3500K.
Yeah.
10%, 20%, 30%, 40%.
And here's an interesting little nugget for you. Every light that I've tested the dimmer on, it dims evenly across the canopy everywhere. I wasn't sure whether that would be true before I started testing them, but it's not just that sort of the maximum PPFD drops off by a certain percentage, but across the canopy, everything drops off by a similar percentage, and the total usable ppf drops off by a similar percentage. So it would be a similar thing like that, and we would expect the distribution of the loss essentially to be fairly even across the canopy.
How
That's
about
good to
the
know.
penetration? Is that a factor losing efficiency?
No,
too?
penetration is probably the most misused sort of thing
Sure.
about lights. People talk about it all the time, but it's not really a thing.
Okay.
It's a thing that some light manufacturers talk about to try to sell lights by saying that their light penetrates better than other lights. I think references to sex like that sell products in general, but no, light, we're dealing with density is what's important with light. It is true that different spectra of light interact with things differently. So like leaf tissue, and some light will pass through that leaf tissue and hit underlying leaves more than others. But that's not why we're selecting the spectra to grow under. And it's not something that you would want to sort of adjust about a light or get a light with like extra penetration or something. What we're concerned about with light, whether it's LED or HPS or from the sun, is density, the density of photons. How many photons are striking each square meter or square centimeter or whatever it is per second. Yeah.
The reason I actually brought this up was I was on a hike the other day and I brought out that meter just for curiosity and put it on like my forehead.
Yeah.
And at 9 a.m., 2600 motherfucking par. And like
See,
the
so
sun
that's
is
not-
a fuller
that's not-
spectrum, and I know it's not exactly.
It's
right,
not accurate. And that's off by at least 25% and probably more. The highest PPFD I ever measured under direct sunlight in Los Angeles was just over 2000. And that was like on a day that the sun was strong. That was at noon. It was direct sunlight. And you can get maybe up to 2100, 2200, like the brightest sun on the brightest day. But if you're getting 2600 at 9 a.m., that's just showing that your meter's not super accurate.
for the sun, I would say. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And, Matthew, I think you could take over from here.
Sorry.
No, no.
That was
no,
fun.
it's fine.
I always
I
like
love
talking about
talking.
lights. I'll shut up now.
No,
Go
no,
back
no,
in.
I
I
like
think we
talking
wrapped it
about
up
that
though.
stuff.
I don't
Yeah,
know
we
if-
did.
I didn't
We
want
did.
to
It
cut
was
it off too soon, but I
I
think we
was
definitely.
interested. I was still interested in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I had done with Aaron, we had done that insect vision video, and I really took a look like back at what I know about insect vision, what anybody knows at least, because it is very complex, and so light became a really interesting factor of that. And you know, like a lot of insects can actually distinguish between colors in the way that human vision can. So that's the interesting thing about light. But what I wanted to talk about was actually the sort of a bit of a topic teaser for that video I was talking about how aphids try to find plants, because I know a lot of people in the cannabis space are either annually or perennially dealing with cannabis aphids, rice root aphids, but also sometimes other aphids like black bean aphid. And they always ask me, like, how is it possible, or why are they able to do this? And without going into a bunch of detail that I will in the video, I do know that, contentious as it is, people say that plants will be avoided by things like aphids if their sugar content is high. And I've been seeing a lot more traffic and conversation about that. So I felt like it'd be a fun thing to sort of address. I have a PDF here. I actually have several PDFs open at the moment because I'm combing through them for more detailed quotes and information. Thanks, Jack. Let me share that screen.
I still haven't figured out the thing that Potent Ponic Steve was trying to tell me. I've like gone through all of the features on Zoom, and like not even on the actual Zoom call that we're in right now, but on the little background thing where it says like return to meeting, schedule, chat, all these things. I can't figure out how to give you guys like all permission to share screen. So in the meantime, I can just make you host if you want to share screen.
I appreciate it. So this is from oh, was somebody gonna say something?
No, no worries. I was going to say, I think if you click on the participants, you might be able to adjust some settings that way, but sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. So this is from a document called The Nutritional Physiology of Aphids. This is by a very well-known professor of toxicology and entomology, Angela Douglas. And she's currently at the Cornell University, and she studies insect physiology and toxicology. So this is right up that topic, kind of the nitty-gritty questions of like, what nutrients do certain insects want and what quantities, and how are they able to do what they do? And basically this can lead to ways of us controlling what they do through like IPM techniques and things like that. And if anyone wants this document or some of the other documents, another really good one is, well, these are a few other ones too that I've been looking at, but this one's pretty good as well. Honeydew sugars and osmoregulation in the pea aphid, Citrosiphum pisum. And I'll go over an example in here too. But basically, what I wanted to call attention to is that in a lot of aphid digestion and diet research, which we've had for about 4 decades at least now, in a really particularly sophisticated way, I would say. We've learned a lot about how aphids and other insects feed. And I just think it's really humorous, I guess, that some people think that that the brix content in plants is like going to have this like really adverse effect towards herbivorous insects, because although photosynthate does power and is very important for the health of a plant in that it powers all of its processes, its metabolic processes and the secondary metabolites and other sorts of things that will defend itself against insects. That is all true. But the sugar content itself is something that I've seen said that will like cause aphids to like rot on the plant itself, or that they'll shrivel up because they can't digest the sugar. And I guess it's those particular claims that I find sort of at odds with this research. Here's a diagram. This is figure 6 in the document. They're talking about how here essentially in the pea aphid, I'll just actually read the figure. It says, feeding responsive pea aphids is Citrosiphum pisum to variation in concentration of dietary sucrose, 8 replicate final instar apterous larvae. So this is the larvae that there are aphids that turn into a winged form and those that do not. This is one of those that do not. Were caged individually for 48 hours to diets containing between 0.2 and 1 mole of sucrose. For those who don't know, 1 mole of sucrose is like 342 grams of sugar. And usually in concentration, we do this in like liters or some fraction of that.
That's a fucking lot of sugar.
It's a lot of sugar, right? It's basically, under the right conditions, 1 liter is like about 1,000 grams of water, as I understand it. So that's 342 grams of sugar dissolved into 1,000 grams of water. And for those who know, brix content is a concentration of a dissolved solid, in this case, sucrose, by mass. And that's exactly what this is. So 342 grams of sugar in 1,000 grams of water is like 34 brix. Like, do you want to check my math? Is that true? Does that math checks out for everyone who's following along? Did I make any sort of error
Sounds
there?
right to me, but I'm not confident.
I don't know if
Anyway.
grams or milligrams is for the liter, but you're probably right if you think that's what it is.
Yeah. So if I'm wrong, please tell me in chat. But that's how I understand it to be. So here, can you see my mouse?
Yes,
I can,
Cursor?
but
You
hopefully
can,
the chat
right?
can. I
Can.
definitely can.
Okay. Well, basically, you can just see here along here on B. So A is just the volume of diet ingested, right? So this is how many and this is in microliters. So this is how many microliters of phloem is digested. Or yeah. And basically on the bottom, we have the sucrose concentration and how many nanomolars of sugar or sucrose were imbibed or taken up. And 1 mole of sugar is right here. So what they're showing in this diagram is that actually aphids love sugar. Aphids will feed for longer periods of time. It doesn't show it quite in this diagram, but it is the case that when sugar levels are lower in plants, aphids will they'll go through compensatory feeding. They'll feed actually for longer periods of time at a particular point on the plant in order to get more sugar into their bodies. And they use enzymes to break it down, mainly glucosidase and specifically alpha glucosidase and sucrase. So they're very, very good at this, and they can even withstand sort of the brix levels of 1 mole of sugar by concentration. That's massive. That is like 34 brix of sugar. And in artificial diets, like in this one here, in this paper, they go over this pretty well, and I'm not going to go over the whole thing. I don't want to bogart our time here. But they test the sort of osmotic pressure of a bean plant and also an artificial dye that they get. And in this figure here, they're looking at the osmotic pressure of the hemolymph of a pea aphid, and that's like their blood basically. So essentially, as dietary sucrose concentration increases, the osmotic pressure does not. And this is because they have the enzymes that break them down. They break down those sugars. If they couldn't do that, what people say about aphids shriveling on plants would be absolutely true. Because if they didn't have that capacity, the osmotic pressure would basically pull out the water out of their gut lumen, and they would indeed shrivel up. But they process most of the sugar they feed on, and other things like proteins and amino acids. They actually don't rely on amino acids for the most part because they have bacteria in their bodies, like Buchnera and Serratia, which I'll go over in the video, that basically biosynthesize those amino acids, especially the essential ones, for them. So they don't actually need those things. So when people try to control that in their plants, it doesn't really make sense to me, according to the kind of the research that we have on the subject. And again, if anyone's interested in this research and would like to go over it themselves, I do in the video, but I would love to provide it for people who are curious. And yeah, so I just wanted to go over this. This is just a small example of that. And they even go over how the mouth parts are formed. And the other one, this is the nutritional physiology of aphids.
Does it help if I back you up right now and say I've had some really, really, really healthy plants that I had a really tight IPM schedule on, and one day I found 1 aphid, and the next day I found 100, and the next day I found 1,000. And I'm pretty sure the brix was through the roof on those plants because they were some of the healthiest plants I've ever seen. So I just
apparently not. Apparently nothing you produce, if you have bugs on it, is healthy, and also apparently even suitable for human consumption.
Right.
Which I don't know about that.
I got your back on this one, man. Brix really doesn't. I mean, maybe there's certain pests that high brix can help manage, but aphids ain't one of them in my experience.
Well, I would never say.
I think this is just a correlation causation rift here. I think that high brix plants are generally healthier, and therefore they're generally healthier, and that becomes sort of conflated with they must be able to fend off pests or other things. Yeah. There are certainly some pests, and Matthew, you could talk more about this, that are able to better attack weaker, struggling plants. But yeah, the idea that the sugar itself is going to become too much for the insects, I think has been, this growing cannabis and the industry of sort of supplying advice about growing cannabis is full of things like this that are based more on myth than on science.
And I would even go as far to say that I totally agree with people who say that higher brix plants are more healthy. I think that's like almost assuredly true from a point of like gathering the resources in the photosynthate and using it to feed the microbiome in the soil. And also all the processes that they go over. And so I think you're right. And that's why I was very careful with how I described this, that like that part I totally agree with. It's just weird to me that people would say that like the insects couldn't actually feed on the sugar. That just sort of doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's a breakdown in explanatory models. So people recognize certain kinds of phenomena, and then they build. We all do this. It's part of just being. We build a model to explain that phenomena to ourselves, and then we apply that model to interpret other novel phenomena. Sometimes that works out just fine. Other times we make heinous and erroneous errors in the process.
I think that there's a couple of misconceptions that have been about brix that have come from a couple of different sources, right? So there are some industries that do test brix on fruit to try to see their sugar levels, but that's not, really what most people aren't even reading brix properly if they're using a refractometer, because really what they're doing is they're grinding up leaf tissue that also contains cell vacuole fluid. It contains all kinds of other things, not just what would be available, but also things that were stored. And so that in itself isn't a good measurement. And I know this because that's how I used to do it until I understood the data that sap analysis lets you have. And high brix is kind of a myth because plants will go through stages throughout an entire day where those levels fluctuate. And what you want to see is you want to see brix levels just over the total sugar level, because on sap it shows you both, and that means that the sugar is being complexed or it's being utilized. If it was vice versa, the plant isn't properly photosynthesizing. So when we're looking at cannabis and plants and things like maybe like grapes or cranberries, and we're talking brix, I think we're probably talking different things. And then also when we're talking about using something like a refractometer versus using sap analysis and what these like data points actually correlate and correspond to, there's kind of some confusion. So brix, your levels of complex sugars will vary throughout the day, because what's happening is the plant is always in real time pulling nutrient from the soil, and it's metabolizing things. It's creating proteins, it's creating all these different chemical compounds, and it's also releasing photosynthates and root exudates into the soil, to compensate for things that it needs. So
basically it's a useless measurement, just like when you go get your cholesterol tested. It's a one-time snapshot of your body, which is totally ignorant to the changes that are constantly happening.
My refractometer is collecting dust on my shelf. I'm with you guys.
A refractometer for cannabis testing is probably not really the way you want to go, but even because that's just not giving you a proper data. I mean, you could it gives you a data point, right, that you could use to measure what that is for that particular thing, whatever that thing is. I guess total, let's say you were taking a certain mass of material and you were mushing it up, right? You're not getting sugars and just sugars, and you're not just getting carbohydrates. You're getting everything that's in that tissue, everything that was in those the vacuoles, everything that was stored away in an unavailable form. So you're just getting an overall reading of stuff, but you can't be like, what is this stuff? As opposed to some other type of data points where you could say, hey, this correlates to the buildup and complex, because brix also correlates to molybdenum in plants, because molybdenum it's a cofactor in the creation of proteins because it's responsible for the nitrogen reductase pathway. And so having the brix where you're getting all of this energy and all these things are storing up into complex proteins is correlated in that way. And it's complex. I don't know how to I'm not seeing it in my head like I normally do at this moment, but when you're looking at it from a data set point and you're able to correlate it to something else, it makes it easier to be able to say, hey, this is what this is doing. As far as insects go, I agree with Matt, man. The trick to insect management is just proper IPM protocols. And you can't like, oh, we can't do it today. It's like, no, you have to do your shit. You have to maintain it. If you don't, it doesn't matter how healthy your fucking plants are. If there's something introduced into there, nature finds a way. That's what it does.
It's funny. I think the whole like statement that like if you get to certain bricks that insects won't bother you is sort of like wishful thinking of a gardener. Like, oh, if I can only achieve this bricks level, then I won't have to worry about pests. And I just think so many people have found out the opposite. And
yeah, and I was one of the people that was saying that, because I wasn't having issues and stuff at that particular point when I started doing that. But as I started, being more I guess using methods that are already proven and tested in other agriculture industries and being able to correlate and kind of adapt that data to the cannabis, which is a much more higher nutritional needs, and then using different, the different medias that aren't in conventional agriculture, because we're not dealing with soils, we're dealing with something completely different. So trying to apply both the mechanics of the soil chemistry and then also the internal chemistry of the plant is like two different realms that we're looking at independently. And in the case of bricks, we're not looking at just basically sugars that are being we're not just looking at how much sugar's there. We're looking at all the times of days where that brix level will drop because the plant is utilizing those because they're going through some type of internal process to be utilized in another form, in a manner that's going to benefit the plant, whether it's the construction of proteins, hormones, if it's creating enzymes, or again, sending the photosynthase.
I really like how you articulated that.
yeah, I definitely agree with everything Brandon said. And I just also thought it was interesting. Breeder Steve, who's grown a lot indoor, outdoor greenhouse, he is grown mostly in Colombia right now. And he always jokes or kind of comments, I think, truthfully, saying he feels like the pests go after his sweetest plants, like the tastiest herb, or like some of his favorite strains tend to be the ones that the pests gravitate towards. All grown the same way, all using the same IPM in the same field plots. Certain plants tend to have way more pests on them. So I think even like the terpene profile or other aromatics off of that plant could either repel or attract certain pests, depending on where you are and what is around. So there's a lot to consider with it, but I do agree with what Brandon was saying. Proper IPM is just your best bet, no matter what. We shouldn't just kind of rely or hope on nature to be right when we can be proactive to avoid any of the more likely pests in your area.
I think the only final comment I want to say is that when I hear these claims, it's almost not always, but I would say there's a high frequency that somebody will follow up with saying, and so if your plants aren't healthy, like you're not basically it's almost like they're saying like, oh, you're a bad grower. Almost, I feel like that, like you are not producing healthy plants because they're not a certain level of sugar content. And health as a concept, I don't want to get too like philosophical, but you got to quantify that word. What do you mean when people say that health, what do they mean when they're saying it, and like in different environments, I think different compositions or genotypes, we even know with adaptation, right? Like in a way you could make that abstraction that you're not actually healthy in certain contexts, but you are in others.
And there's a good like kind of way to think about this. if you took someone who was maybe real tall and skinny, and that was their body type, right? That was what they expressed. And then you put that person on an artificial like program for like steroids, right? They could potentially get really, really big, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those things are maximized in health. You could take the same person and put them on the things, what's good for them and a healthy, to try to do the same thing, but you may not always get the same result either.
Yeah, maybe. Oh yeah, not to interrupt, but like maybe some plants, like when they get those photosynthate, maybe even some cultivars are more resistant to some pests, and they're able to use that energy and like achieve that, better resistance. But that's gene based, for example.
Well,
So
we know that's true,
Yeah.
because there was just a peer-reviewed research paper that was released not too long ago, and I just saw it floating around IG, and it was about the powdery resistance gene, and they aptly named it the PM1 gene, powdery mildew gene. And so they've identified that genetic marker that will have a resilience characteristic for a certain type of powdery mildew.
That's a good point. And then there's the reverse that I've talked about before. Susceptibility genes in plants are exploited. Maybe it's the best way to put it, is that those genes have effects, and those effects are exploited by like mildew locus O. And mildew locus O is conserved in a lot of plants. Some of those genes, there are various genes in that family. And so pathogens like powdery mildew or fusarium will exploit those genes to ingress the plant on the same. But people ask the question, well, why are they not like, gotten rid of?
If up and down regulated, that's part of the whole epigenetic thing, right? Is that
well, yeah, but these genes in particular, the reason why they don't go away is because they have an alternative function, which is to also help mediate interactions with like mutualistic fungi.
It's so, like, do you think theoretically you could have, genes for resistance, but that won't be really turned on until you have a certain type of parameter and set where the plant is going to have at least some level of optimum health? What do you think? Because I know that the genes can be up and down regulated depending on like certain, conditions, and they'll, even though DNA can continually be replicated, it's not always perfectly replicated. And that's part of like that process. If we can maximize the functionality of those specific processes, can we essentially combat these issues just based off of the gene sequence?
Sort of. So I mean, like definitely reactions to stressors can cause genes to get expressed more, expressed less. Various events, various like interactions with the environment and other organisms can cause that sort of a thing to happen. Also,
day length, like they are with cannabis. I mean, triggers different genes to express.
I wanted to, speaking of powdery mildew, Kyle Breeder is only going to be with us until 5 o'clock here on the West Coast. So I believe we got a question from Kinder Grows, who says, I've got an organic raised bed outside for vegetables, and my cucumber plant is showing signs of powdery mildew. Any tips? Also, anything you would recommend for pests getting on the veg? So I just wanted to give Kyle a chance to jump in because he hasn't gotten a chance to talk at all during the whole show. And if you have any thoughts on that, and then we could maybe pass it back to Matthew. Or on the other question, Lou Grown mentioned, do you have any tips? This was probably more applicable to Kyle. Do you have any tips for environmental considerations when upgrading from a cheapo budget light that's too small for you in your grow space to a beefy light that maximizes your space? Kyle.
It's an interesting question. Is he just trying to figure out, I mean, is there going to be more of a heat issue now because the light's bigger? Is that kind of what he's concerned about? Or I
think that's what they're presuming, yes. Lou Grown, you could follow up if you're still here with us.
Yeah, I mean, I since I've started growing, I mean, I was starting with HPS, so I had to crank air conditioning pretty heavy for like 24 hours a day. But once I switched to LED, I mean, a lot of the LEDs don't really put off too much heat now, so it's not really a huge concern, and you can kind of use that to your advantage, especially during winter. But yeah, I would just I run like a little 12,000 BTU air conditioner. Then it's set it for like 74, 76. And I mean, my electric bill isn't really all that much jacked up. Maybe it varies, but it's really not all that much. I would definitely invest in that. That's certainly helpful. And I just basically cool the outside air of the, because I use tents, my residents. I just cool the outside air and then basically push in passive air from the not passive. I basically have inline fans at the bottom of my tents on both sides that pump the cool air from the room in. And then I have 2 inlines up top that exhaust any of the air that's in the tent into carbon filters. And that's just basically what I run constantly. And I mean, obviously for 2 reasons. It's good is it's always getting cool air from the room. And for 2, no matter, you could be basically in the room and you don't smell marijuana. And ironically, I'm in a place right now where I'm not supposed to be growing, which is kind of shitty, but it's temporary. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that helps him or not. What'd you say? Was there a question about powdery mildew, Jack? The first one you had?
Yeah, the first one, if you look in the Zoom chat, it's on there from Kinder Grows, but I'll reread it for anybody who didn't hear. It says Kinder Grows at Cheap Home Grow. I've got a organic raised bed outside for vegetables, and my cucumber plant is showing signs of powdery mildew. Any tips? Question mark. Also, anything you would recommend for pests getting on the veges is what they wrote.
Well, some things I've learned from Matt. I'm sure Matt will have more extensive knowledge on it, but I've been using sulfur and water, man. That seems to work great. If he was indoors,
I'll echo that. I'll agree with that.
So I have a buddy that's had problem indoors. So if this helps anybody, I know the question's not indoors. An ozone generator, because he tried cleaning, bleaching, and everything, and it just wouldn't go away. But he used an ozone generator. They sell little ones for like $50, and that apparently got rid of it. And that's and he had it for like a year. But so that's like that. But yeah, sulfur and water doesn't work for me. I kind of effed up and I went to a Gene Trader show, and somebody that I knew that was giving away clones there. I'm not going to name drop because people might know them, but basically looked me dead in my eyes and told me that they're clean, and I knew the kid, so I like trusted him. It's like, yeah, they're clean 100%, dude. Well, I got PM not that long, a couple months ago, and quite frustrating. So now what I got to do is basically I'm going to run the ozone, but at the same time, sulfur and water does wonders. It kind of gets into the porous parts of the plant, and so what I'll do though is I think it's like a 2-week regimen, but what I'll do at the very end, just to ensure, is I'll actually scrape like an inch or 2 of dirt out of the pot, and then I'll dunk the whole plant into. I'll get like a big like a 10-gallon bucket or 5-gallon bucket, and do a sulfur water mixture, and I'll submerge the entire plant in that, and then that's like my final stage before I actually introduce it back into the room that's completely cleaned out. So I don't know if that helps him, but yeah, sulfur and water. I'm sure Matt can touch on it later. But yeah, I got to get going, you guys. Pure breeding, new name. Hopefully everyone remembers it. Hopefully I remember it. But if you're looking for feminized seeds, I do have a website, pbreeding.com. I am looking into acquiring purebreeding.com pretty shortly here. But yeah, reach out if anybody has any questions. I'm here. I love talking to you guys. So
Kyle,
yeah.
don't trust anyone.
Yeah, I
like ever.
I know.
That's
What's funny is I had it once before, and it was a mistake because I didn't know any better. And then I was like, all right, well, I'll never let that happen again. But then like this kid that like it was almost like one of you guys. I tried.
I've done it. I know what you mean. It
was literally like one of you guys were like, Kyle.
Somebody
like,
said, "Don't even trust your mother. Don't even trust your blood family. You got to treat it as if it's infected."
Man, is I called the kid, right? I said, "Hey, man," I was like, "I got PM on the plant that you told me," and he was like, "Well, obviously I had it. What do you think was going to happen?" And I was like, "What do you mean? I knew you had it."
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
He just got moved. I hope on your list of people.
Right. And his response was, "Oh man, it's easy to take care of. I don't know why you're complaining so much." And it's like, dude, now my whole entire tent's like filled with that shit.
I dropped that name. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, no.
If it's easy to
Don't
take
do
care
it.
of, why do I have it, Dick? That's what I would have fucking said.
Yeah,
Hey,
like
you should have
dude,
taken care of it before you
Yeah.
gave it to me.
Exactly.
right. Basically, you just costed me a bunch of time and money and other stress that I don't need. But yeah. So everyone, don't trust anybody. Especially with
Matthew,
plum. I
before
mean,
he goes, I have a question about Breeder Steve's technique. He says if you get it to 95 degrees for like, I think it's like 1 day a week or maybe once a day for like a week, it'll get rid of your PM. Is his theory. And you can just run your lights without exhaust for like 15 minutes a day and then cycle them back on. The plants typically don't have a lot of harm. And he believes that it kills off PM. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I heard you had to hit 120 or approximately for like a couple hours.
More temperature would make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm just quoting Breeder Steve. And,
Okay, so the 95 for an hour is for people who have anything plastic in there.
Oh yeah, because that'll melt for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of like plastic around electrical wire. There's shit to worry about. In a commercial setting or maybe a greenhouse, I can see hotter.
I was just saying for 15 minutes, and he says do it, I think, like every day for a week or something like that. But this is just his claim.
That's part of the Jungle Boys SOPs is to do that
At the
intense
end.
temperature after each crop. Yeah,
but they have metal
I
fans.
definitely agree with that after each shot. Yeah, some
There's
just turn it up
thermals and all
to
that
200. Just turn it up to 200 degrees, and everything will be dead. You're good to go.
That's right. That's right.
Well, that's what Tal was saying. They do that between runs essentially. Is they let their lights run and just cook the room at like 150. I think is what they're.
Oh shit! I was kidding. That's crazy, but yeah, that'll work.
Just put in like a just some sort of like plasma conductor or something. Just X-ray beam, just hard X-ray beam everything.
Yeah,
And,
we just microwave.
Yeah,
turn the whole room into a microwave, and like when no one's in there, blast it for 20 minutes. That's I'm inventing
Hook your hot
that.
pocket at the same time.
Ozone
you
pretty
go.
much does
That's
that.
right.
if you
So
really
what
wanna-
we do at work is we just shoot off this product called Procure, and it smells like chlorine the next day, and everything is squeaky clean. Well, we gotta wash the tables and shit, but I mean the air is clean.
I've had personal experience with Procure, and I would have to say I've had good results. So I don't like to make this as an endorsement or anything like this, but I just want to echo Spartan's words.
What about your results? You guys were using ozonated water, for my knowledge in the past. Did you stop?
We use that for cleaning the tables. So when we're resetting the room, we'll clean the tables with that. And we're still.
And that's
using
for people who don't know. They're adding an extra oxygen, O3 ozone, right? Essentially to the
Yes.
water, and it dissipates over time, so it's not dangerous.
20
but it can-
minutes. We get 20 minutes in a 5-gallon bucket.
You know, ozone's come up with me recently too. People asking about using it for filtration instead of carbon filters. It's true. I mean, but ozone is like one of the worst environmental pollutants at the sort of surface of the planet. It's really important in the ozone layer. But it's one of the primary components of smog. And I don't know, I couldn't get behind using an ozone generator to filter the air.
You know, I was
if
gonna
you're
say
using
this
ozone,
earlier.
yeah, no, I know. If you're using ozone in the water, you're dissolving O3 into the H2O, just like we like to dissolve O2, dissolved oxygen into the water.
Do you guys remember their Sharper Image used to make this? It was like supposed to make clean your air, and it generated
those are the things I'm
ozone
talking
on
about. Those
accident.
ozone generators
Yeah,
that say they clean the air.
So they got sued, some class action lawsuit. They got sued because it was like people were getting sick in near them. So I just want to put that as an asterisk.
UVC bulbs too. Those clean wands.
Yeah,
Those let
stay out
off.
of the room when you're doing them. Yeah,
Those let off
definitely.
UV, or not
Yep.
UV. They also let off ozone. I should have said. But yeah,
they make
even say
exhaust
that in
fan
them.
filters that are ozone generators, and they even advertise things like creates more ozone than any other fan or whatever. And they warn you not to stand downwind from it and not to breathe it. But it just seems, I don't know. All this ozone stuff just raised my cackles a little bit. I don't think ozone is necessarily as safe as a lot of people think it is.
Carbon filters
ozonated
work.
Water. and
Carbon
sprayed
filters
it.
were great for air filtration. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I would. Yeah, I don't like ozone in the air, but the ozone in the water works great. And we sprayed it directly on the plants with the lights on even, and they didn't even have one fucking problem with it.
It's definitely interesting. I know Kevin Jodry mentioned in the past, before carbon, they would put it in their exhaust vents out of their grow to try and cover the smell. But now, in my opinion, in modern times, most people have access to carbon filters for purifying the air at least. So I think that's probably the better way. And I think there's even UV that doesn't let off ozone I think there's one called like the air sniper, and there's a lot of similar devices that when they filter the air to kill like molds and other things in the air, run it through some sort of UV light before they cycle it back out into the rest of
I wanted to get back to something that you asked pure breeding about Kyle about as he was on the way out the door about the LED replacement and the heat and dealing with that with the grow. One thing that I think is, I don't know, just some interesting information. The amount of heat that your light adds to your grow space is almost purely a function of the power draw, regardless of the lighting technology that you use. If you have a 1,000 watt HPS or a 1,000 watt LED, regardless of how efficient the LED is, it's going to end up, all these different things are going to end up having almost exactly the same impact on the grow space in terms of BTU. The reason that LEDs are often sort of thought of as producing less heat is because they're now more efficient and you use less wattage for the same amount of light. And the heat is just an impact of the wattage itself. The other thing that a lot of growers get all sort of twisted up about is the heat impact of the LED drivers. And the LED drivers produce about the amount of heat in terms of the overall heat as their efficiency rating. So if you have a driver which is like 92 or 93% efficient, then it's only producing like 7% of the total heat or 8% of the total heat that is in that space. And removing the drivers from the space really don't have that big of an impact on sort of the heat added to the space.
But 8% times like 10 lights and a smaller like grow op, I think if they could mount it outside, that adds up. And in my opinion, I would rather have the 8% outside if you can remotely mount the drivers outside of the grow space, which some people like to do. Some people actually, because LEDs, not that they run so cool, because you're running so much less wattage. I agree with you. A watt is a watt as far as heat is concerned, because not that it's going to be hitting the canopy the same way. I think HIDs put the heat more directly on the plant, where the LEDs tend to put it up off of their heat sink
It just
into the top of your
radiates
grow
out,
space.
right?
Yeah.
And all of the
top.
light eventually becomes heat too. So when we're talking about like reflective losses and all of that stuff, that's all heat just scattered around the tent. And that's the same based on the light.
And then there's something to consider in terms of wiring stuff far away, which is voltage loss. And that, you don't really need to worry about it until about 50 feet. But when you're dealing with these sensitive diodes and drivers, I would err on the side of less wiring between the driver and the diodes.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about a big light that produces like, 3,000, 3,500 BTU, removing the driver is going to knock that down from like 3,500 to like 3,200. It's not going, and that would be sort of an inefficient driver. So maybe to like 3,300 or something. It's just, if you're dealing with a heat issue, that's not going to get you a whole lot. It will potentially help. And if you can set them right outside, that's still totally fine. But a lot of growers become sort of like twisted up about it, thinking it's going to be a huge difference. And it's really, that was smaller than I sort of my pre-analytic vision of what it would be.
You're still going to be using a giant commercial HVAC if you're running like a commercial facility like Spartan Grown over at Mitten Canico, or like there's a bunch of HLGs at Grandmaster levels grow up in Canada. And I'm sure he could remote mount those. I'm not sure if he did. I'm pretty sure they're all on the actual lights. So he accommodated for it by getting enough HVAC. So at that level, I think, like you said, they're not going to worry too much about 7%, but it's something to think about, especially because like you could have like, I see a lot of these facilities have multiple grow rooms, right? So like Mitten Canico, you can walk down a hallway and there's like grow room after grow room. So you could have like your hallway be much warmer, and okay, maybe the workers are a little uncomfortable, but that takes that 7% out of every single one of those rooms accumulatively. And you could wire it knowing that, okay, the drivers just need to make it to the end of this row and then they can all be mounted outside that room in theory.
Well, just to play a little bit more devil's advocate, you don't want to put them outside in the sun.
No, inside like the walkway.
Yep. And if you're
So,
putting them inside in a climate controlled space, you're still paying to cool that heat. You're just paying it through your whole house air conditioner or something else, unless you're just letting it get hotter. And the efficiency of the drivers depend on their heat. So, after realizing that the amount of heat that's added to the grow space is entirely a function of the wattage, growers ask me why I measure the temperature of the drivers and the heat sinks in my reviews of grow lights. And it's because that determines their efficiency. If you put the driver someplace hot and it's not efficient at dissipating that heat, the driver will be less efficient. The same thing with a LED panel that doesn't effectively dissipate that heat. If the LED diodes get too warm, they start running less efficiently too.
That's an interesting point. It's like your computer, when it starts to run too hot, the fan kicks on, or else it'll start to lag if you don't have a powerful enough.
Yeah. So you don't want to put your drivers someplace just like hot. It's not like, you can't treat them like your compressor and your air conditioning, where you just set it outside in the sun and let it get 5,000 degrees.
They run at like 100 something though, right? Like when you laser gun it, even at a controlled, like I have it running in my tent where the room is like
they're
80,
always,
and it's at 100. So like if you just had the walk path, like you have your, I don't know, Inkbird or whatever.
Over 100 Fahrenheit, they're like at 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. So you like 120 to 130-ish in that range.
So I'm saying it's a lot cheaper to like the walk path in between all the grow rooms. You could have that set to like 85, 90 degrees, where you might want to have the grow room set to like 77 or something like that, where it's a little bit warmer.
You can't, because our res is there. You don't want your res to get warm.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
This reminds me of how difficult it is to conceive of ways to effectively travel space, or at least even have installations in space, because your heat management has to be.
Say the end result of all this is the vast majority of the heat is coming from the light itself. You can't sort of actually get rid of it. You got to deal with it in one way or another. You can make marginal improvements to some of these things, but the answer is, if you have a large grow space like that, you have to control climate. I mean, you need more, BTU capability in your air conditioning or whatever it is to sort of keep up with that.
When I do see the remote, they usually go up with them. They usually go like into an attic space or something like that.
It's all homeostasis at the end of the day. There's no free lunches in physics for the most part.
The main thing is, I just think LEDs compared to an HPS, it's typically where the heat is being dissipated off the top of the heat sink, where you could have exhaust fans set up basically exclusively to pull that hot air out, where the HIDs are kind of pushing that heat more down onto the canopy. So you're going to have a lot more moving fans, and that's usually a good idea anyway, to get the airflow around the plants. But
I totally agree.
Something to accommodate.
In general, HID produces more heat than light, or the efficiency is that they give off more heat with the light than the LED does, right?
Well, it ultimately
watt for watt, it's almost exactly the same, but micromole per micromole, LEDs are much more efficient.
Right.
But
much more
watt
of its
per
light
watt,
up front.
Yeah.
That's why you could use a 600 watt LED instead of a 1,000 watt HPS, and that's how you get your health.
Right, and you're going to get about 60% of the heat, but that's because you're using about 60% of the wattage. You're still getting the same amount of light potentially. Yeah. Exactly.
And 1,000 watts is like 3,400 BTUs roughly, or something like that. So
yeah, that's what I was saying. That's where I got that 3,500 number from, thinking about 1,000 watt light and thinking about, with 1,000 watt light, the driver is going to be producing less than 300 BTU. The light itself is going to be producing like 3,000 BTU. So when you're thinking about, how much you can gain, that's how much you can gain.
I would say it's more like 700 to 750 from what the lights I've seen that Dr. MJ is reviewing, things like that. And the other consideration many people don't mention is a 1,000 watt HID typically doesn't pull 1,000 watts. It pulls up to like 1150. Some people put it right on max and they push it, they overclock them. But even running at just 1,000 watts setting, it pulls more than that from the.
Well, this is great because we evaluate LEDs and HPS differently. So HPS has always been described based on the output current from the driver, from the ballast. So 1,000 watt HPS pulls like 1100 from the wall, it loses about 100 of them in the ballast, but it's giving 1000 watts to the bulb. LEDs, we always talk about the wattage pulled from the wall, not the wattage from the driver to the fixture. Add to that the fact that most 1000-watt LEDs don't come in at exactly 1000 watts, and they're on the other side. They're like 960, 980, 990, something like that. And yeah, they're up against 1000-watt HPS that's actually at about 1100.
I think I've told it before, but I'm reminded of my friend who had bought a UV light, and when we were setting it up, I looked at the instructions, and basically it said that you have to be very careful with this like massive industrial light. They were trying to like do some sort of photo shoot of something, because like it gets like they're like it gets to 300 degrees Celsius, and I was like, 300 degrees Celsius. They're like, oh no, like Fahrenheit. No, Celsius. Like that's massive.
That's
like
fucking hot.
it was not what they were actually supposed to be getting, but they wound up with this like massive UV industrial light, and you got to pay attention to those little details.
What does a HID actually get to, like 1000-watt HPS? Because I know that's actually pretty hot. It's not 300 Celsius, but it's
It gets
pretty
hot as
damn hot.
fuck. I know. It's enough to burn you just by touching the hood on it.
Well, even I see
don't
people
know
run
what the
those
bulb
bare,
temperature is.
the bare bulb grows where they hang them through the fucking alley of their grows between the plants, and that
Yeah.
scares me so much because I just like I've been under them, close to them, knowing I've never actually burnt myself, thankfully, but you could feel the intensity of the heat coming off those things, and if you bumped into one, I'm pretty sure that's scarring you.
Yeah,
So be careful, people.
second, third degree burns.
Definitely not a good thing. It kind of reminded me for some reason, I don't know, there was something I think in Michigan, some like garbage truck crashed into revealed a grow op, and it was HID, but it's like one of those
Yeah.
things, like those guys that are doing like the non permitted grows. I don't want to call it illegal because I think it's kind of fucking a little bullshit that it's illegal to grow it if you've got a permit in certain spots.
Non-permitted is a very nice way to refer to
I
those
like
guys.
that.
I like that.
I like that.
Yeah,
I
not
know
permitted
people
yet.
who singe their hair on their lights. I'm just saying, not me.
I've been close to doing that. I feel the heat on my head even from the LEDs from like a few inches away. It'll start to give you a nice sunburn.
Oh, I get so hot testing these damn things. I mean, I literally, if I'm testing a 5x5 light all in one pass, it's like I'm sweating like a dog at the end of that, just sort of hovering over the light so much. There's a lot of heat, and it'll eventually heat up our whole house if we have to let the LED run for a while. So for sure, there's a lot of heat.
It's nice for people growing in those colder climates. You know, sometimes you don't have to add a heater with the right light. It kind of gives you a little bit of homeostasis. It keeps the plant semi-warm. Not that it should be your only source. Always good to have accommodations for those treacherous times when it gets super cold or super hot. Like that one question was asking about environmental, I guess, budget constraint going from a small light to a bigger light. But I'm curious if we have any more questions from the chat, and just how Brandon's going over there. I haven't heard an update from you in a little while. You've been kind of quiet. How are things going over at Black Label, and how are things going in the grow box?
Oh, I love the grow box. That's my favorite place to be at the farm right now. Everything's going good, man. It's always constant amount of work. I don't think people understand how much work it takes. It's full time, and then I'm still doing my bokashi thing on the site too. So, but yeah, it's going good. We are getting prepped for fall, which means we're getting ready to harvest our outdoor, which we actually didn't do so great on this year, but we learned a lot, like when to plant and making sure that we have supplemental lighting when we do plant, things like that. There's just a lot of things we were unprepared for, especially the insect pressure this year was insane. Grasshoppers and leafhoppers were crazy fucking like numerous, and so were caterpillars. So we know that next year at what times we need to apply certain biocontrols. We did a lot of learning, but we're doing good. All the greenhouses are good. I'm doing some testing on the last batch of seeds that I made, which is the I did the Limelight F2, which is Limarilla times Mac V2. F2 of those I'm testing. I have some gas V2 F2s, which is a cut of gas that I found. Cross that into Mac V2, and then I back cross it into its sister. Testing those out. I'm also testing out the Black Lime Reserve times Limarilla Mac V2, and then I'm testing out the Death Breath S1 times Limelight, which is the Limarilla Mac V2, and then I have a bunch of new stuff that I'm pheno hunting.
That's exciting. How do you go about choosing your testers? And do you have a established crew already, or do you just kind of pick up new people each run and see who wants what you're working with?
No, I'm testing them myself.
Okay, 100% in-house.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure that that everything's good before I let them go out to anybody else, and then I can see how some other people go. But I just want to make sure that what I test is stable, and I want to see if it's what I was looking for too, because it's pretty complex as far as like what I'm doing, because I'm trying to isolate certain characteristics without doing any genetic testing or anything. And I'm trying to pull kind of a certain terpene profile out of the Black Lime Reserve. And there's some other things that I'm trying to get with the Limarilla times Mac V2. And so I'm doing some line breeding, and I preserved the actual cuts that I bred with, because I did an open pollination for the F2 on the Limelight, and I have all of the females that I still used with that one male. So what I'm going to do is I'll use those cuts, and I'll go into my Black Lime Reserve stock, and I'll use different males on each one of those females, so I can try to pull out and identify the characteristic of the males. And then I'm also going to do that with a couple other varieties where I'm going to do the Limarilla V2. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the different male Black Lime Reserves and hit the same clone. So I'll take a set of clones, I'll hit it with one male. I'll take another set of clones, hit it with a different male, right? And I'll keep those, isolated. That way, when I test the progeny that came out of each of those flowers, and not just those for that certain variety, but across other varieties, it'll give me a better interpretation of the characteristics that male plant is going to be expressing, right? So if I use that, like my Limelight 22 male, I'm currently doing the GMO cherry pie. I'm going to pollinate that, the regular GMO. And so I'll have 4 different varieties that I've used that same male on. So when I test those, I'll have a really good idea of the characteristics that my number 22 Limelight male, and the same thing with the Black Lime Reserve males. I'll have each male preserved, and then I'll be able to decide which one I actually want to keep, because I'll know which characteristics it's kind of bringing forth across a wide variety of different cultivars.
It sounds really exciting. You got a lot going on, and I definitely look forward to all of the work that you're putting in over there. That Bicket OG or that GMO cherry pie looks really fire. It looks like a little bit of a later finisher, but a really heavy yielder. That greenhouse is looking fantastic.
I just transplanted 2 limelights out of like 1 gals into their final sip containers today. So they're gonna start vegging up now.
Nice.
They go crazy in those sips.
They
Yeah,
have a
absolutely.
really nice profile. So I get a lot. So there's kind of a small variance in the profile, but I get a lot of green, like Jolly Rancher, now and later, with like a cereal milk like profile.
Wow, that sounds nice.
Yeah. So, and some of them will be more like sour apple with a citrus overtone, and then it'll have almost like a fun dip kind of. Like I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like like stale cereal. You know what stale cereal smells like? It
Yeah.
like all cereal that gets stale kind of has this general like stale cereal smell.
Yeah.
That's kind of like one of the profiles that it has.
I love the frequent reference to cereal to describe taste. This is something that I can identify with in place.
There's a
Also,
strain
fun
called
dip for that matter.
What is
There's
the
a strain
highlight on those?
called cereal milk that
Yeah.
like cannabiotics out here in California, if you want some from the legal market, is probably a great representation in my opinion. Both their concentrate and the flour, it has that milky flavor and it's at a great high. I'm a huge fan of that.
Now,
strain.
whereas all cereals may smell the same when stale, I would argue that different cereals affect the flavor of the milk in different ways. So I'd be curious as to what cereal was in the milk.
It
Oh,
would be cool
yeah,
to
I
target
like that.
terpenes
I like
for
that.
milk and
Yeah.
a certain cereal in that milk. That would be.
Well, to give you some context, one of my favorite strains of all time is from, I think it's Alien Genetics. It's called Fruity Pebbles OG.
Yeah.
And that strain is like Fruity Pebbles in milk. It smells like a fucking bowl of, when I was a kid, they had Fruity Pebbles. I guess they changed the flavors. I looked into it because I wanted to like what smells made up that profile. And I think it was like strawberry, but I don't want to name them because I don't have it offhand. But if you Google Fruity Pebbles in like the 90s versus Fruity Pebbles today, there's like a different combination of like 4 fruits that make it up. But there's also the milkiness. The strain cereal milk to me does not have any of like the sweetness from the Fruity Pebbles OG. It's more.
I had
like
no
milky.
idea your Fruity Pebbles knowledge was as deep as your cannabis strain knowledge, Jack.
That's funny. I got a shout out to Tiki Madman. He sent me a cross. He's calling it Cobra milk, and so I brought that into work, and we're gonna pop that there and pheno hunt it. I think it was. I don't know if it was 5 or 10 seeds. It wasn't a lot. Maybe it was 5 or 6 seeds.
That
Silver
guy.
milk is a cool name. Actually, this reminds me of one of my favorite adjectives for like a smell or a taste, and that's a farinaceous. I looked it up one time because I was playing or a storytelling a D&D campaign, and I was trying to find a good word to describe like stale, mildewy, kind of like musk of like a dungeon or something, and or like maybe like mushroomy kind of even. And farinaceous is, and I'm just looking it up here. It means consisting of or containing starch. So I feel like that's pretty relevant. So when I would just have a really good memory linked up to that word. So when you guys started talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, I love it when people use adjectives and descriptors that actually help.
It's reminiscent of the word dank for me, like a little bit as a similar, I guess, word to describe some of those mustier smells that can somewhat be appealing. But the milk one is curious for me. And the reason I was so interested in the Fruity Pebbles was when I found out, like with Velvet Punch, that it smelled just like artificial grape flavoring to me, that it was methylanthranolate. That sort of pushed me down the rabbit hole of like, well, maybe Fruity Pebbles is the same way. Like, what were they using to flavor the Fruity Pebbles? And maybe I could work backwards. Like, is that in cannabis at all? If so, maybe that's what was in that strain.
I knew there was a connection. I knew there was a connection there somewhere. Yeah.
Something tells me that the Fruity Pebbles cereal is like R6759, not like a turkey.
Yeah, but they're actually based on those same. I mean, Jack can tell you.
Red number 4, blue number 6.
All I know is
Yeah.
that day that shit
smells
was
like
fire.
Red 30.
Fruity Pebbles.
I've
was
never
fire.
tested my weed and had for terpenes and had it come up with red number 5 or yellow number, whatever.
No, but it might have methylanthranolate if you looked for it, and that's the artificial grape.
Yeah.
And that's why, like,
Hey, if we
Purple
wait
Punch
a little longer, we might.
and the
So,
crosses.
yeah. So what's the R? What's the value of methylanthanolate if I'm looking at it like a grape soda? What do I look for? Is there going to say methylanthanolate? Blah, blah, blah.
It
That's a
would
good
say
question.
artificial grape flavoring, or it will just say artificial flavors because there's loopholes, like how they can say fragrances when they have like they call it shampoo, but it's really like detergent actually in a lot of the cases. But there's a loophole, like a fragrance loophole, where they can put basically any ingredient into a beauty products and shampoos.
I think there are some disclosures about that, and they have to be things that are considered to be generally safe or whatever that legal term is. But yeah, for those things that could be considered proprietary or trade secrets, they're not required to disclose.
Although I understand the reasoning for it, I've always been really, I've always found it very alarming that people can just like hide what's in like food products and stuff.
Well, that was actually one of the things about the red food coloring that was made from cochineal.
Yeah, that's true.
Cochineal is the original color fast red dye. It comes from southern Mexico. A little beetle that lives in cactus that you can crush the beetle and it makes a color fast dye. They use that for all sorts of dyeing things still. But they also use cochineal in food coloring, and like vegetarians recently filed suit about that because that there was insects in the food coloring and that violated their vegetarianism.
It was in a bunch of the candies. It's called confectioner's dye.
Yeah,
vegetarians are the best sleuths I've ever heard, man. That is some investigation, man.
The vegans, yeah, the vegetarians and vegans for sure. They can definitely get down on that stuff. But yeah, I was, I love. It's coming up to Halloween time, and that candy corn is terrible and gross and disgusting as it is. I actually enjoy the flavor, and I just can't stop eating it when it's around. And I found out that
Peeps, so I won't talk much.
Oh
yeah.
I'll trade you all day. You're my best buddy then, because I'll trade you all the Peeps for all your candy corn, bro, all day.
I am not a candy.
Well, the trick about Peeps is you have to let them get stale. I open all the containers first and let them get like this hard outer edge. So after a couple of months, pretty good.
That reminds me of some weed I had that really gave off a nice stale peep smell.
Yeah, stale Peeps, man.
That sounds weird.
There's a strain called
I'll have to try that out.
They were like, and anything. One of the guys who was pushing it, but Peeps is like, how like Oreos and gelato, wedding cake, all these like candy strains, Skittles, all this stuff. So like I think he kind of made like a meme strain, Peeps. And one thing that I think is funny about Peeps is if you go on YouTube and look up Peeps in microwave, they have like Mortal Kombat sounds in the background as these Peeps like grow and explode. It's entertaining. So I don't throw that out there for anybody who's high and has some time to enjoy some.
Yeah, so somebody just mentioned the red dye issues in the chat. I just want to say there's lots of different red dyes, and the reason that they started using cochineal is because the other artificial red dye caused health problems. Like
cancers, I think, if I remember correctly, and like yellow and
and I think that his comment about lowering testosterone is probably related to that and not to the cochineal based dye. I think the only problem with the cochineal based dye is that you're eating insects.
Yeah, there are allowances for insect fragments in canned food. I'm sure that you're aware, and many other people are, but yeah.
Rat droppings are allowed in Milky Way bars too, a certain percentage.
That's true. That is true for all your needs. Hershey's.
Don't ruin those micronutrients or Reese's cups for me, because those are the fucking bomb.
Yeah, I know it's like pretentiously in vogue to be like Hershey's is like F tier chocolate. Like I only have good, nice, high quality chocolate, but I was never a huge fan of it growing up either. I except for like the dark chocolate, I suppose. Sometimes Hershey's got it right with their special dark as a kid.
The dark chocolate's easier to hide the rat poop in, man.
Probably so. Yeah.
Supposedly healthier for your heart. And I don't know. It's definitely you can't account for taste, right? Because I hate dark chocolate, and I would prefer their milk chocolate shit with almonds, or even like they had it's not even real chocolate, but white chocolate, the cookies and cream.
Yeah,
I know a bunch of stoners out there love that shit.
What is white chocolate?
It's just sugar.
Disgusting.
It's not
gross.
I don't believe there's any cacao in it, right?
Cacao.
Mm-hmm.
There's chocolate chips in there though, so I mean, it was like white chocolate with chocolate chips. The cookies and cream was it tasted like, I don't know, Oreos and milk in a candy bar.
I had a friend growing up that was allergic to chocolate, and he could eat white chocolate. And my entire impression about white chocolate is the only reason you would eat it is because you would die if you ate regular chocolate.
That's like decaffeinated coffee or non-alcoholic beer. What is the purpose?
Wait, what's the difference? I was actually talking to my girlfriend about this the other day. What the difference between white and dark chocolate? I don't. Is there like a bean that's
So
white that comes from
white?
like?
No,
No, I
white
don't think
chocolate is just sugar.
there's cacao. That's what I was saying.
It is not chocolate.
It's not based off cacao, which is
Not even a
chocolate.
little bit chocolate. It's just parading as chocolate. Like you can make fucking meat out of like vegetables now.
It's like,
with
yeah,
this-
it's like beyond
It's
meat.
like
It's beyond
imitation
chocolate,
crab
baby.
legs.
Chocolate
What's the
Beyond
point?
chocolate.
Chocolate.
Beyond chocolate.
Chocolate is a liar.
white chocolate exposed.
Yeah.
That
It's
was
definitely
fucking
beyond
hilarious. I'm
chocolate.
rolling over here on mute. I'm dying. That was fucking hilarious.
That was funny.
Yeah.
It's below
Oh.
chocolate.
I don't think chocolate is the normal thing we talk about on this show. I'm maybe on the wrong podcast, but I think
Spartan Grown, save us with some edible
Yeah,
chocolate
this is the right podcast.
references.
We're all probably
I got
wrong.
my
Or I can
chocolate
depress
pie
you with
going.
the knowledge that chocolate production is waning because of global reasons.
Well,
Hey,
white chocolate's
Matthew, can you
bullshit.
give us an update on the coffee pests that are killing my favorite beverage?
Not recently have I been looking into that sort of a thing.
All right, good
But
enough.
yeah. I do
feel
know
like
that
they're-
spot, but
my favorite
hopefully-
Bouveria bassiana is coming to the rescue in those crops and also other like berry crops. I think I was looking at some papers for rhinoceros beetle, I think it was, and that's going after some berry crops. I think also palm, but yeah. Sorry.
no worries. That's interesting. Yeah, I hope they take care of it.
I think coffee, like cannabis, can be impacted by some of the inclement weather, like the severe rains, flooding, even hurricanes, and some like Caribbean islands. I know some of them grow coffee. I know they're not necessarily the most known for it, but like Cuban coffee is pretty well known. And there's a lot of the Central American countries that if they get hit certain times of year. So maybe I guess we could talk a little bit about trying to. I know Spartan Grown's got a killer ass plant outside right now. It's stinking up. I think it's Sparkleface, if I'm remembering correctly. Looks
Yeah.
like it's crushing it outdoor. What would you do if it just started to pull one of those Michigan, week-long rains? Like it's not going to stop.
Well, I have stakes out there that are supporting it, so I just stretch some plastic over it. The stakes are taller than the plant. The stakes I got on purpose to be taller for that reason. So I could just throw a tarp over it. Hell, I could even put the little rings on the side of the tarp through the stakes and even put more stakes out if I wanted to.
but still, that's got to be such like late into the flowering period. That's got to be such a rot risk to have like tarp over your plants in the soaking wet. Would you do anything else to mitigate rot?
Well, I've already stripped the shit out of it because I found the early stage of PM on some of my fan leaf. So I already did the leaf strip and treatment. And if it comes up again, if I see more PM, I'll just probably do a milk. I don't like to do sulfur in flour. So I'd probably do like the diluted milk, 1 part milk, 3 parts water, spray the leaves and hope for the best. But when you're outside in Michigan, it's a 50-50 chance you're going to get the harvest anyway. So you just no risk, no reward, man. That's why I have 1 plant and not 10 plants.
What about just like a big blower fan, like, put on the ground just to
Well,
move some air?
I'm not exactly doing it where I'm supposed to, so I can't draw attention because I'm right in the middle of a neighborhood.
I was more concerned about somebody stealing your plant. How nice and
Me too.
it's
That's why I
looking
got a
and
camera
smelling.
out there.
Yeah.
That's why I have a camera out there, so at least I can see who my enemies are.
How many weeks to harvest?
Oh, dude, it's a ways yet. Unless it just finishes super fast. This looks like I've got at least a month to
A
go.
month, right? Yeah.
It's pretty
That-
early flower. It's tough to say. It depends on the weather, how it's going to finish, right?
One of the things that we did find though is the F1 generations of those gas V2s that we ran in the fields. They finished really fast. They're already ready to come down. So that's really nice for Oklahoma timing because I think it's about to start raining next week.
Did hurricane season pass already?
Hurricane season is
No, not until November.
Not until November. Okay.
Yeah, this is,
I think it's in
this is
spring.
hurricane season.
Huh? I think it
In
hurricane
spring, he
season
said.
is in spring.
They're still kind of
Oh.
coming right now. Like there's
Oh,
one that's
that-
going to be missing the East Coast just narrowly. It's like going along the side of the United States. So it's just not.
Yeah,
Hurricane
that's
or-
Superstorm
I think it
Sandy
depends
in
on where you
October.
are.
You know, it's the opposite. We talked about hurricane season and tornado seasons before, and we came to the
Oh, no,
conclusion
I
that
don't know.
tornado season is in the
Oh.
spring and hurricane season is in the
That's
fall.
what it was. A different kind of gust of wind that
Yes.
does
Unless-
things.
Unless you're in Florida, and then hurricane season is like 10 months out of the year.
Oh,
We had
Well, and in
a good question
Oklahoma-
in chat that Matthew might be able to help with.
Oh.
Actually, it's a double help out. It was for plants. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. But the original question was 650R Blackwater, asking, is it safe to use Dr. Zymes in a sieve container water filled tube to kill root aphids? Thanks. My only input here is I think you would be
No.
missing the root aphids, man. I think you'd want to be. Yeah, I don't think it's going to help with root aphids, but I think you're going to be missing the root aphids if you're pouring it through the tube. You want to go through the medium.
It's just not
Agreed.
enough.
You know
You want
what's a
that?
really
You need that coverage. You would need that coverage for it to be efficacious. And I also wouldn't say that it would be my first choice. But yeah, I think that given that context of the question, I agree with what Brandon was saying.
the best solution that I have found is to rotate between Bavaria bassiana and Pyganic natural pyrethrin, and rotate bi-weekly with Steimer Feltier. That is extremely effective for any problem that is going to be in the soil related things like fungus gnat larvae, root aphids, other types of nematodes even.
I'm not sure that the other nematodes will affect them, but I'm definitely gonna agree with Brandon here about those three products being kind of a nice like cocktail rotation for like various subterranean problems. Yeah, fungus gnats, that makes a lot of sense. And also like for the rice root aphids too, for the Bavaria and the pyrethrin. I'm a big fan of using those in combination or separately, those two.
Dude, so what we found is that by using the spore concentrate, that's what I use, the stuff that I sell actually on my website, through Bokashi Earthworks. I'll actually use 50% of the recommended dosage of that Bavaria bassiana spore. I do 200 liters and it usually treats 100. But because I'm also adding in the pyrethrin at a 5% ratio, it's not 5% total to volume of water, but it's 5% pyrethrin, which comes out to, man, I couldn't do the math right now, but it has dual efficacy because you're coming at the problem from two different angles. So you're coming at it with something that's going to fuck up their nervous system, and then you're coming at it with something that's going to come in and while they're already jacked up is going to parasitize them, so that is, you get more efficacy out of both products when you use both of them in conjunction with each other. And then when I rotate with that, some people have told me, because I think they heard on the Kiss Organics podcast, that they didn't see something work in a laboratory setting in a petri dish where a root aphid where the nematode didn't parasitize it. But if we don't use the nematodes and we only do the treatment bi-weekly with the Pyganic and Bavaria bassiana, we don't see the efficacy. We see higher insect pressure when we stop using the nematodes. So, and that's the only thing that we're using for that system. So I know that in the system that I'm using, that it's effective.
It's
Or
interesting.
we wouldn't be doing it. You know what I mean? If it wasn't effective, we couldn't afford, because when you're talking about scale and managing IPM problems and having, like if something
Multiple
isn't working, dude, you got to ditch it.
I agree.
Are you using
guys,
a blend, or are you using just SF nematodes?
Oh yeah,
I'm
good
just-
question.
I'm just using the standard NAMA.
Okay.
Peltier or
Yeah.
but with
Yeah.
a combo of the pyganic and it's like a
No. So
In rotation.
it's a rotation, so it's bi-weekly on each. So pyganic goes with Bavaria bassiana on every Friday, and then the next Friday we'll do 150 to 200 million of the standard name Peltier nematodes.
In the past, I've said that it makes sense to me that the nematodes wouldn't really go after aphids. Plus, I haven't seen evidence of that in like research, but I'm not discounting what Brendan here is saying, because although it makes sense, because nematodes usually do better on larger hosts, generally speaking. I wonder if there's some sort of like morbidity thing that's going on that allows the nematodes, that disables the aphids in a way that maybe allows the nematodes to like penetrate the body easier, or
What do you think the
recognize
chances
them
are
better
they
as
have
a host?
common? No, what
I,
the
will- I
aphids
wouldn't
itself,
know
does it
what the
only
factor
feed on
is.
the
I
root?
just know that because of the type of
No, it's
cultivation
interesting.
and where
I
we're
think
at,
that
we always have insect pressure, right? There will always
Mhm.
be an insect pressure, but it's always been about keeping it at an ecological threshold where it's not affecting the quality, the quantity of the harvests. And so maintaining all of our IPMs, doing different things in veg, and then starting, the inoculations that are continuous with other biocontrols later on in flower and stuff like that is, if we don't do that, we'll get something. We'll see problems pop up. It's just like fact of the scale that we're at and where we're at in the country. We're in farm country,
Yeah.
like,
So, Brand, I had to give a chance to Spartan Grown to, jump out because he's going to be going over to the Michigan Grow Show here in a little bit. So he needs to let his dogs out and refill his tray and all that good stuff. I had one question before you go, because I don't think I've been seeing it this year. Do you know if is Sequence doing his greenhouse operation again this year? And if
No.
so, he's not. Okay.
No. He's actually got his glass blowing workshop all built out, and he's actually the last 2 days building. He's already made a spoon pipe, one of
I
them.
saw that.
And then and so he's messing around making the little balls that you drop on top of bangers. It's like in place of the carb, or whatever you call it, carb cap. So yeah, he's playing around with glass, I think, this time.
It's cool. Yeah, it's. I was just curious because I remember last year he was able to in Michigan have a pretty successful greenhouse operation from what it
Yeah.
looked like. And the other thing I wanted to comment on before, just to wrap up Brandon and Matthew's point, was maybe the pyganic or the Bavaria weakened the aphid in some way, that maybe that's why the SF nematode was able to then come take them out.
That's a good
But that's
point.
just my guess.
I also want to say that it's possible that they do work. I haven't seen that experience, and I've had experiences where they weren't able to work on their own, but that doesn't mean that there's, the world is more complex than my own experience. So I really appreciate Brandon bringing that up.
It's a great point. And Spartan, where can the people find you before you head out?
Yeah, everybody can find me at Spartan Grown on Instagram, or Spartan Grown at Gmail as a email, or at the Michigan Bros Grow Show is where I'm headed next in a few minutes. And we have a guest, Jamie Lowell, who's not only is he a cannabis attorney, he's part owner of the very first, well, I'll say dispensary because that's how you say it everywhere else in the fucking country. We can't call it that here, but the first dispensaries here in Michigan. And he's always been an advocate. He helped write the law, the medical law in 2008 that passed. So he's a guy on our side for sure. And so I'm 100% going to be talking to him about this bill if I get a chance. I've got it printed out right here next to me, and I got a few questions for him anyway. So I'm looking forward to it.
Godspeed, brother.
Good on you taking them to task for it. Good job.
He's like
Well,
our Dennis Perone.
on
He's a
our
good
side of
guy.
it, yeah,
He's like the one who made the earlier cannabis bill that all the people like and that they don't want change to. Like how our 1996, when we had Prop 215, everybody loved it. Dennis Perone made it great. Sounds like this guy had a medical mind to help the patients who need it. So hopefully it'll be cool to have you talk to him. And then people check out Spartan Grown's Instagram, because recently, I don't normally push people's pages this much. He's been doing a lot of posts about that particular law, the House bill that's being introduced, breaking it down, the important points and key things that really should not be changed, that will really cause a lot of problems for home growers, caregivers, everybody alike. So definitely check out Spartan Grow's recent post on that, because it's very important to the people of Michigan.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to get the word out. I've already sent emails to all of the sponsors of the bill and my own local rep, and then I'm going to give them a few days to respond. I know it's the weekend now, but if I don't hear from them soon, I'll be making phone calls, and if I don't get responses there, I'll be down to their offices, even if I got to travel. Cheers, guys. I got to get running.
Your love, Spartan. Keep up the good
Cheers,
work.
love.
Have a good night.
Sweet.
Thanks for hanging out.
Peace out, Spartan.
Always good to have Spartan on. He can also be found at Mitten Canico, his commercial operations. He's a great contributor to this show. Always happy to have him. Anybody who's curious, I've been puffing on. This is actually a battery for a vape pen. It looks kind of like a little wooden piece, but it's got a little button on the top for vapes. It's not an actual pipe. Better than, I guess, the regular old battery. My wife got this for me. So shout out to Lady Greenstock. But we've got about 10 minutes left. And I guess we could go into final thoughts before we do our shout outs.
So Jack, I don't know if I said it on air last week, but after at some point I said I wanted to do that stealth seed giveaway. And so everyone in chat, I decided that the first 3 people who commented live in today's chat, I would give the opportunity to get a free pack of Amy Aces. And those 3 people were Crack Babies, DWC, Smart Poker, and the Jeffro 42069.
Great
So-
fucking people to win, dude. That's awesome.
If those 3 guys want to hit my DM on the IG, and I'll get you out a pack of Amy Aces and some slaps. And that's just for appreciation for you guys showing up. And I'm glad it was those 3. Smart Poker is always one of the first ones. And I'm kind of sorry that Real Red Hairs wasn't one of the first commenters. But you know what, Real Red Hairs, if you hit me up and you want a pack, I'll get you one too, because you're always usually one of the first ones. So we'll do that too.
Grower love. That's awesome, man. And cheers to the winners.
That is epic. The American one. Thank you so much for doing that for the community. It's an amazing thing. I will warn anybody, if you grow Amy Aces, have a good carbon filter, because mine has stank right through my fucking carbon filter right now. I need to replace the cover. Maybe I have to replace the whole carbon filter entirely. It's not a huge deal where I'm at. I smoke enough that my place stinks like herb anyway. And most of my neighbors actually grow. So it's not a huge deal around here. But
What is it reeking like?
oh man, so much different stuff. It's like it's got rubber notes. It's got some like new shoe rubber, but also like stinky foot. It's got a lot of lemon citrusy notes in there, and a little
Yeah.
bit of fuel. It's a very complex aroma, and I'd say it's probably 3 weeks away from chop at this point, maybe 2-3 weeks out. But
I'm
it's
glad you
funky.
had so many, because I can never pinpoint it down really. And it's like all of those things too. Yeah. All right, good. Excellent.
she's a vigorous plant from start to finish, and it definitely over exceeded my expectations with how much it grew. But that's a good problem to have. I'm gonna have a lot of Amy Aces to be medicating on, and I look forward to trying it here in a few weeks. So whoever won, Crack Babies WC was the one that I remember. Smart Poker, shout out to Smart Poker. He's got a YouTube channel and he's on Instagram. And seeing he's not showing his face, but he's got like the mask on, and he's doing showing how to transplant. He's been a long time Cocoa for Cannabis community member.
Yeah, he's been showing
great
the how he tops his plants. He did the first top, second top. I think that's third and last one was the recent one. Yeah, he's excellent. And just so everybody knows, the Jeffro 42069 and Real Red Hairs is on the list. So there you go.
All good people, and if we could, we'd give you all seeds, and I'm sure over time eventually some of you will get some from us, because as we make them, we've got more than we need, and we're happy to share. My one contingency for anybody is within the US. I still haven't figured out the whole international stamps thing yet, but my post office keeps telling me no, that it's not a thing, but I think you can order them online, so I might go with that approach for the international people. I tried like this one person, a family member in Canada, 4 times. They got intercepted every single time. Like even when I sent it to like a different name, different person, it was just a whole debacle. So didn't have good luck with that. And there's also like, they want you to fill out the shit to give a whole bunch of personal information if you don't use the international stamp. So I don't know. Getting seeds to people can sometimes be more difficult than people expect, but it's worth it. I know a lot of people are able to do it. So I'm happy to see people getting them. Brandon's got a lot of seeds out there. It's cool to see some people growing his gear now. I've seen a lot of the American ones, Amy is all over the Instagram, far and wide. You've made that all the way out to the UK. There's some grow rooms that are monocropping it, which was going to be the case for me as well.
Dude, when I first ran that, I was like, this plant, I knew the mother. I think the mother, because I love the mother, but Not, I don't know if everybody else in the world would love it as much as I do, but when I grew out that AMEs the first time, like, man, this shit is legit. And then I was like, in my breeding, I made a whole bunch of other ones, but I figure if I put that one out there, they'll find something they love about it. Every single person that grows it is not disappointed. So I figure I'm going to just try and pump that one, make it the next blue dream in the world, and then I'll have my name out there.
Tao's Amiaces, and then you'll get the cookie recipe that you can, the American ones, famous cookies, keep you young forever. Reverse the aging process.
Yeah, now that New York is starting to slowly open up a little, it should be much better for me. Yeah, that's all. So, yeah.
I saw
I got an
somebody in the
HVAC.
chat saying they were going to make a Tau-matic or something, and that was kind of funny to see.
That is good. You could cross Amiaces into some. Well, actually, it's funny. There are people that are doing breeding work with like some of our creations and stuff. Like I sent out a velvet punch tester to New Bud Tender, and they're crossing it with some of Kyle Pure Breeding's work. So we're gonna have a velvet punch cross with, I think, like New England rock candy or some cross. So it'll be cool to see. One of our listeners has gotten gear from both of us and put them together, and get to see the collaborations with that. And a lot of people that DM me are talking about mixing Kyle's work with autos, or even some Brandon's work with autos, and the American ones with autos. So it'll be cool to see people experimenting and trying to see the whole expression of the genetics out there. I'm really happy to see people breeding with stuff. I know not everybody feels that way, but I think it's cool to mix it up and give people access. Like, seeds can be really expensive. So once you make your first set, you could literally just be set for life if that's all you wanted to grow. Typically, people want to have more variety, but you can get a bunch really quick. And just know that you have the power to do it yourself at home, just like anything else. That's what the cheap home grow is all about, is being able to save yourself some money if you choose to. And regular seeds are not as big of a difficulty as a lot of people make them out to be. So I just want to throw that out there and give people like the American one and others who breed regs a chance. One question for Brandon: Are your recent seed drops, have they been regs, or are you doing fems?
No, they're all regular. I'm using male stock that I'm picking out of what I kind of like the best.
Good stuff. Well, Brandon, I want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts and shout out.
Sure, yeah. I'm always happy to come and join the rest of the panel. And thanks for having me, as always. And for anybody who isn't familiar with any of my work, you can find me on Instagram at rust.brandon. And you can find a link to my company, Bokashi Earthworks, just like the logo right there. Sell some, a lot of different microbes and some biofertilizers, stuff like that. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I'll see you guys all next weekend.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next up, Dr. MJ.
Hey, everyone. I enjoyed the show today. Thanks for all the interesting questions from chat, interesting contributions from the rest of the panelists. I hope everybody enjoys our harvest moon. I think the full moon is tomorrow, but this is our harvest moon. If any of you are harvesting now, it's really appropriate. We got a PTGC giveaway coming up that I wanted to let everybody know about. We're giving away one of the new Photon Tech SQ 300 watt grow lights for a 3x3 tent if you're in the PTGC. And it's not like technically too late to get in the PTGC, the Plant Train and Grow Challenge at Cocoa for Cannabis. You can sign up for free, or if you're in it, just update your journal, and we're going to do that drawing on the 1st. I am also got some YouTube stuff coming out, so subscribe to my YouTube. I'm going to be documenting my grow coming up. I'm going to be germinating tomorrow, and I'll do my first video sometime shortly after that. So cool. I had fun today. Grow love, everyone.
Thanks again for joining, and definitely check out his YouTube. Very professional content, growing really fast, and I'm happy to see you getting that content out there to the people, because there's so much misinformation, especially with lights and cannabis growth science and how to grow in cocoa and things like that. I see a lot of people getting misguided, and I can help them out through their struggles and failures by pointing them to Cocoa for Cannabis simply. So it's nice to have a stable resource and great YouTube channel to be able to send to the people too. So thank you so much again for joining us, Dr. MJ. And next up, we got Aaron the Grower.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. This was a lot of fun tonight. Did a lot of learning and listening. I do want to, since we're talking about breeders a little bit, I wanted to give a shout out to Creature Ravine Gardens. That's the weed I was trimming on earlier, this Baja Blast that really I don't think anybody's seen, but this is one of these underrated growers that really, or breeders rather, that are just putting out fire, kind of like everybody's sleeping on it. Anyway, I'm ATG Acres, Aaron the Grower. That you can find me on Instagram at ATG Acres or atgacres.com if you want to get yourself a plant packer, which is the best way to ship your clones around. Or ATG Acres on YouTube. So good to be here every week. I'll see you guys next week.
Always happy to have you, and I agree. Best way to send clones for sure. And I couldn't echo more the sentiment on growing seeds from smaller breeders, because in my experience, they've been the most fire. I've been a little bit nervous because everybody wants to try the hot strain or the most popular strain, but then you give somebody who's got a lot of passion and dedication. And if you look at their work and see, like, that looks impressive to me. Tiki Madman was mentioned earlier as well, another smaller independent breeder, but I've been seeing he's been making killer ass selections. So I think people should trust the small breeders and give them a shot more often. And speaking of one, the American one, I'll give your final thoughts and shout outs before we go to Matthew.
I'll say I saw ATG Acres post of that Baja Blast. That shit looks like indoor. I don't know. I think it's partly ATG Acres growing capability, just making it look amazing. But yeah, that shit certainly looks legit. So I'll throw that out there. And
Thanks,
yeah,
bro.
it was an excellent show tonight. And happy to be here. I'm the American one on the YouTube and the American one _ with _18s on the IG. Most of you know where to find me. And yeah, thanks again, Jack, for hosting. I see we're running a little late, so peace out all. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you so much, the American one. Always good to have you. Reminder to everybody before you head out, smash that thumbs up button and pass it last to Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversations. I like that we talked about a lot of kind of heady topics like physics and chemistry and a bunch of cool stuff like that. So again, if you are interested in some IPM information, I like to make that as freely available for people at all scales, though I am a consultant professionally. And you can find that information in my YouTube channel, Zenthanol. Also, my Twitter and Instagram accounts are at SyncAngel. And remember, I have a video about how aphids detect, locate, and feed on plants, even the healthy ones.
Great way to lead people into maybe checking out some of that content on the Zenthanol YouTube, and maybe consider that $1 a month donation to the Patreon, so you can get access to the Discord channel, which gives you direct access to Matthew and all of his wonderful IPM knowledge and experience. So definitely consider doing that. I linked the Patreon and most of people's information down below in the YouTube information after. It takes me about a half an hour to type up a general idea of what happened on the show and everybody's contact information. So if that helps people out, then hopefully that's a good thing, and I'll continue to do it and hopefully get this up on the podcast in about 30 minutes for those who listen on the podcast afterward. Thank you, everybody who listened live here on the YouTube. Really appreciate you. Thank you all to my panel members for showing up for another week. I always appreciate your input and learn a lot every single week. So I'm going to keep coming and enjoying doing this with all of you guys every week. So look forward to next week. You can find me at Jack Greenstock, as you can see behind me here with my little logo on Instagram primarily. You can also email jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter, Jack_Greenstock. Those are all the places that you can find me other than the show. So thank you, everybody, for coming. This is Jack Greenstock signing out.
Grow with love, everyone.